Hello, it's John Heaton, and glad to be outside here because the spring is just about here. And hear the birds there, and I'm hoping the planes stay away for a few minutes. I'm going to complete my Beatles album review this afternoon with the Beatles, the second album from November '63, remarkably released on the very same day that JFK was assassinated. So this is my stereo copy. It's not an original. We're in the sun, but I'll risk getting it out quickly. This is just on the standard EMI Parlophone label. I think this was a late 70s reissue, and then which plays perfectly well still. And then I have, let's put that in the shade, this mono copy which I picked up yesterday, which again is not an original, and it's a UK pressing, and I think it's early 80s or mid 80s or something like that, again on the Parlophone label, but in mono, because I think I always wanted to get a copy of this in mono, because that's how the Beatles intended it when it first came out. I think the early albums work better in mono in terms of an overall sound. I don't think you need the separation that maybe was warranted on the later albums. It's a more powerful sound, I think, on mono, so a more enjoyable listen. So I'll put the record in the shade, but I'll keep the sleeve out. So the first thing to say is maybe this album sort of gets forgotten about slightly because it's kind of slightly overshadowed by some of their greater albums, possibly. But let me just say this, I mean, we're talking 5-star albums, all of them. Every single one from Please Please Me through to Let It Be is a 5-star album. So it's, you know, we're just quibbling to say which one was better than others. So I'm not really a big fan of rankings, although I did do one recently. So what I'll say is, if you're in the mood for early Beatles, then you put on an early Beatles record. If you're in the mood for psychedelic stuff, you put on that. If you're in the mood for the later stuff, you'll put on one of the later albums. So that's what's great about the Beatles. There's so much variety, and so I'm going to point out what I particularly like about this album, and one of its great strengths is its opener, It Won't Be Long, which is a storming number from Lennon, which, believe it or not, wasn't a single. Could well have been single material as far as I'm concerned, and I mean that in a positive way. Storming vocal from John and storming support vocals from Paul and George. Great musicianship, great drumming. The musicianship on this album is even more impressive than it was on their debut. They really sound tight as a band. Obviously they'd been playing for several years live already before even Please Please Me came out, but this was, in sound-wise, a consolidation of the first record, I think, and the Lennon-McCartney songs, I think, are, with the exception of I Saw Her Standing There, I think are a step up from the first album. So the second one is also a Lennon song. By the way, this cover shot, iconic shot taken by Robert Freeman and much imitated in later years by the Rolling Stones and others. So iconic cover, back cover with sleeve notes from Tony Barrow, who wrote the sleeve notes to the first album as well, I believe, and maybe even wrote the sleeve notes to Hard Day's Night, but by the time Beatles for Sale came along, Derek Taylor was writing the sleeve notes. But all I've got to do is the next number, Lennon-McCartney number sung by John, and again, not very well known, and obviously known amongst the fans and loved by the fans. It's a great moody Lennon track, influenced by all kinds of stuff he'd been listening to, no doubt, but I can't think of any specific influences on this song, but it's, you can tell he's been listening to all that American music in the previous few years. And then All My Loving, probably the most well-known track from the album. John Lennon was very complimentary about this and slightly jealous in a 1980 interview with Playboy, and so he liked this track, and he wasn't too often complimentary about Paul's work, so that was nice to hear. But John, as he said in the same interview, he plays a mean rhythm guitar in the background, and he certainly does, and an example of how the musicianship of the four Beatles transforms what is already a great song into a great sound, and enhances the song even more. Then we've got George's first attempt at writing, Don't Bother Me, which is okay. It chugs along nicely. He wasn't too fond of it himself, and to be honest, it's not my favourite. It's okay, but I don't love this track. Little Child is another forgotten Lennon-McCartney gem, with a vocal from John Lennon again. He's singing the first 3 out of the first 4 Lennon-McCartney songs on side 1, with help from Paul, mainly on backing vocal. And some people don't like this track, but I think it rocks along really nicely. I love it. Till There Was You is Paul covering the song from which came out this Under the Influence CD. Again, very useful for me to tell you where the songs came from. Till There Was You, Peggy Lee, 1958, written by M. Wilson, and similar type style to A Taste of Honey from Please Please Me. Very nicely delivered by Paul, and they used to do this as a band in Hamburg a few years previously even. And Please Mr. Postman is a cover written by a chap called Holland and by a group called the Marvelettes, and I think the Beatles version is superior. I think they really make it their own, and it's probably my favourite track on the album. I love this to bits, and play this one loud. And desperate vocal from John. Check it and see one more time for me. Deliver di letter, the sooner the better. You got to wait a minute. It's brilliantly sung, and a lot of emotion into this song, and tour de force cover, one of the best Beatles covers ever. Side 2 opens with Roll Over Beethoven, which not my favourite cover of all time, and Chuck Berry, R.I.P., just recently passed away. George does a creditable version of this on this album, but I think there's an even better version on the Hollywood Bowl, where they take it at a faster pace. This version is just a tiny bit pedestrian for me. Not to say that it doesn't have its merits, but it's just, I think it's a little bit routinely done on this album. Maybe they did it on stage better in the Hamburg days or something, but it's not a highlight of the album for me. Then Hold Me Tight, another little Lennon-McCartney gem, and some people don't like this. They say Paul is out of tune for some of it, and maybe he is slightly, but it's sung with gusto, and it's a really nice upbeat number. I love it. And then You Really Got a Hold on Me is Lennon covering the Smokey Robinson track to great effect. I love this track, one of their best covers again. And that song came out, I think, a couple of years before, 1962, so the previous year. So we're talking about recent cover material here. And then that song was also featured in the Let It Be movie, which is still to be released to this day, of course. So I Want to Be Your Man is Lennon-McCartney number, which they gave to the Stones, but they recorded a version on this album with Ringo on vocal, and it's okay. Quite catchy chorus, but nothing special in my opinion. Then we got Devil in Her Heart, a cover song covered by the Donnés. R. Drapkin is the writer. Again, quite a recent cover from 1962, sung very well by George, and nice job. Not a Second Time is the closing Lennon-McCartney number. Lead vocal again by John. So John dominates the lead vocals on the Lennon-McCartney numbers here on this particular album. In fact, in the early Beatles in general, and does a fine job. A very underrated song, Not a Second Time, with some nice piano from George Martin. And then we have the closing track, Money, written by Bradford Gordy and made famous by the Barrett Strong 1959. This is taken at a fast tempo with piano again, presumably from George Martin, and nicely done. Good backing vocals from Paul and George. Personally, I think the Plastic Ono Band did a better version of this slowed down in the Live Peace Toronto concert. That's just my personal opinion, but this is a good storming close to the album. So 5-star with the Beatles, 22nd November 1963. Great album. Thanks for watching. See you next time.